Building collapse. President Joe Biden travels to Florida for a first-hand look at the search and rescue operation. Infrastructure bill. What's covered in the new plan moving through the House of Representatives. Pro-life push. How Bishop Robert Barron is challenging Democratic lawmakers. And prayers for Lebanon. Pope Francis joins other Christian leaders as they seek God's help. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, July 1st, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. U.S. President Joe Biden says, just pick up the phone and tell me what you need. He was speaking with lawmakers, emergency officials, and first responders in Florida, where a building collapse last week claimed the lives of at least 18 people, with many more still unaccounted for. This as the search for the missing was halted due to safety concerns. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports.
President Joe Biden met privately with family members of the victims of that terrible collapse. He also met with first responders in a hotel about a mile from the disaster scene. And tonight, 145 people remain missing. In Florida, President Joe Biden and First Lady Jill Biden thank first responders, telling them the job they're doing is incredible.
Task Force 1.
How are you? What's your name?
Moments earlier, sitting alongside Florida's governor, lawmakers, and emergency officials, the president promised all the federal help that was necessary.
We're not going anywhere.
Thank you, Mr.
No,
President.
for real.
And the president also acknowledged that in the days and months that follow,
There's going to be a lot of pain and anxiety and suffering and even need for psychological help.
the president's visit comes a week after the 12-story beachfront condominium building in Surfside collapsed. But rescuers, for their own safety, have had to stop searching. Concerns over the stability of the remaining structure.
And lives have been shattered irrevocably.
Governor Ron DeSantis thanked President Biden for his support and for recognizing the severity of the tragedy from day one. And the governor said that in each individual unit, there's an amazing story.
What we just need now is we need a little bit of luck, we need a little bit of prayers, and we would like to be able to to see some miracles happen.
With prayers posted along fencing, hundreds of rescuers have searched, but no one has been rescued since the first hours after the collapse. The governor remembered those who were inside.
People who've been 92 years old have been the matriarch of a wonderful family. We have families with kids missing, and we even have young newlyweds who hadn't even been married a year who were in the tower when it collapsed.
Separately tonight, the fight against human trafficking. The Biden administration has designated 17 countries as not doing enough to combat the scourge of human trafficking. Among those countries, Nicaragua and Venezuela. And the pandemic put millions of people at risk for exploitation. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
While President Biden promotes his multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure plan and the bipartisan deal negotiated in the Senate, in the House, lawmakers passed a separate $715 billion five-year transportation bill. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
Republicans say the Invest in America Act massively increases public spending, forces Americans to use public transit, and makes goods and fuels more expensive to please labor unions, while Democrats focused on the bill's infrastructure improvements.
A transformative opportunity for us not only to build the infrastructure of America, but to rebuild the middle class of America. It does so by putting equity front and center with necessary focus on communities of color, rural communities, and regions of persistent poverty.
The measure would dedicate $343 billion to roads, bridges, and safety, $109 billion to transit, and $95 billion to passenger and freight rail. It also commits $117 billion to drinking water infrastructure and over $51 billion to wastewater infrastructure. It passed the House by a strict party line vote.
This is a bill that was put together in the House to spend $500 billion plus that was not done in any bipartisan way.
Republicans say the bill is filled with wasteful spending items.
It invests about $1 out of every $2 in new Green Deal priorities. There was not even simple regulatory relief. We could save up to over $160 billion just by instituting these common sense regulatory reforms.
Meanwhile, a bipartisan group of senators last week reached a deal on a $579 billion infrastructure proposal endorsed by President Biden. Democrats plan to use the budget reconciliation procedure to get that bill passed. Reconciliation allows the majority party to pass legislation with a simple majority vote. Although this Invest in America Act passed the House, it will have a much tougher time getting past Republicans in the Senate and out of the Senate graveyard. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
The U.S. Supreme Court issued two highly anticipated rulings today that address issues of voting and donor privacy. In one decision, the Supreme Court voted 6-3, ordering California to stop collecting the names and addresses of top donors to charities, calling its disclosure requirement, quote, overbroad. In the second case, also by a 6-3 margin, the High Court overruled a lower court case involving two provisions of Arizona's state law governing elections. This decision held that guidelines about polling places do not violate the Federal Voting Rights Act. An auxiliary bishop from the Archdiocese of Los Angeles says that he is offering a very specific challenge to pro-abortion Democratic lawmakers. In an opinion piece in the New York Post today, Bishop Robert Barron writes in part, quote, if you're truly interested in dialoguing with the church on this crucial matter, show a little profile in courage and support Born Alive legislation. And joining us now is Ramesh Ponnuru, senior editor at the National Review. Ramesh, thank you so much for joining us again. Great to see you. We have a lot to get to today, including some big Supreme Court decisions. But I want to start first off with that back and forth between church leaders and pro-abortion Democrat lawmakers. I'd like to get your thoughts on Bishop Barron's opinion piece that we just mentioned.
Thank you. Well, I think Bishop Barron has squarely raised the issue that ought to be raised, which is, are there any protections for nascent human life that people who say they are pro-choice are willing to support? And if we can find that area of agreement, then we can start there and we can go on and keep arguing about the other ones. But as he suggests, that kind of agreement is going to be very hard to find because the Democrats have unfortunately been almost in lockstep against things like the Born Alive Survivors of Abortion Protection Act.
Yeah. Another thing I want to talk about, as we reported earlier, the Supreme Court issued several rulings today, including one that upholds a ban on ballot harvesting in Arizona. For those who may not be familiar, can you explain what ballot harvesting is and also the significance of this case? And do you think this ruling will have an impact on other election integrity cases in other states?
Well, it goes beyond, and really one particular kind of voting practice, whether it is collecting ballots and turning them in, but it's really almost anything that a state wants to do in terms of its election procedures. The court is creating more leeway, saying that the Voting Rights Act that Congress passed gives them more leeway than courts have previously suggested. So, for example, the law says that you have to give equal opportunity to all groups to vote. That is, I think, at this point, a pretty uncontroversial view. But what does that actually mean? And one of the things the court is now saying is that if you have a small statistical difference between the way that one race votes and the way another race votes in terms of whether it uses absentee ballots, whether it uses early ballots, that kind of thing, changes that have an effect that way will not necessarily be considered to be discriminatory based on those small effects.
Yeah, I want to stick here with the Supreme Court right now. There's been a lot of talk among some for Justice Stephen Breyer to step down. I know you know about that. What do you think about that? And how do you see this playing out ultimately?
Well, I think that a lot of partisan Democrats saw what happened when Justice Ginsburg did not heed the calls to retire in 2013 when the Democrats had the Senate and the presidency. And that's why they want Breyer to retire now because they're afraid that the Senate will go Republican in the 2022 elections, or that the Democrats will lose the 2024 presidential election. The question is whether Breyer wants to be seen to be responding to that kind of partisan pressure. He has suggested before that it's important to the reputation of the court that the justices not be seen in those starkly partisan terms. He has just recently said that, and I think if he were to retire now, it would tend to confirm the very charge that he is trying to refute.
And Ramesh, we probably have about a minute left or so. Before I let you go, wondering what you are keeping your eye on right now.
Well, of course, the Breyer decision, which could happen in the next few days if he decides that he is going to step down, that's something that would become a huge political issue in the months to come. Of course, I'm also keeping an eye on the question that the bishops are currently considering about what to do about politicians who claim to be Catholic but are not in unity with the church on the sanctity of human life. Very important question.
Absolutely it is, and we thank you so much for your time and your analysis. Always great to see you, Ramesh.
You're welcome.
In British Columbia, 182 more unmarked graves have been found at a former church-run residential school. It is the third site in the last several weeks. Prior to the discovery, a group of Canadian bishops and Indigenous groups announced a meeting with Pope Francis in December. International military tensions are flaring near Crimea in the Black Sea. Russia is holding military drills which are coinciding with exercises by Ukraine and NATO. Russian forces have made threatening gestures against both British and Dutch vessels just this past week. While police in Hong Kong tried to stop people who gathered to protest the anniversary of the former British territory's return to China. The demonstrators gathered in a popular shopping district. The traditional July 1st protest march was banned by police. One person flying a British flag was apprehended by police, and around 12 people were arrested. Coming up, a difficult situation in Lebanon, what the Holy Father is doing to help. And pro-life law, where courts are blocking a measure that was scheduled to take effect. Christian leaders of Lebanon gathered with Pope Francis today for a day of prayer and reflection. Leaders of the various Christian churches and communities of Lebanon arrived today at the Vatican. The initiative is not to seek a political solution, but to pray for the gift of peace and stability in the Middle East. EWTN Newsroom correspondent Colm Flynn joins us now. Colm, great to see you. So what can you tell us about this day and who was involved?
Good evening, Tracy. Well, Christian leaders from Lebanon gathered around Pope Francis in the Vatican today for a day of prayer and reflection for Lebanon. It started early this morning inside the Pope's residence inside Vatican City, where Pope Francis met the 10 senior Lebanese leaders of the various Christian churches and communities. Together they walked the short distance to St. Peter's Basilica, and after a moment of silent prayer, they went down to the tomb of St. Peter and lit candles. Now, the premise of the day was simple yet very profound: to have a day of prayer and reflection in the Vatican, the very center of the Catholic Church, for the 5 million people who live in Lebanon and are currently facing enormous hardships. They prayed for the future of the country, for peace and economic stability. And it's important to point out, Tracy, that this wasn't a political event. They did not look for a political solution to what's going on in Lebanon, but instead they were praying in response to the cry of their people and to try and help alleviate some of their suffering.
Colm, can you talk to us about the situation in Lebanon right now?
Well, Tracy, the country is going through one of the world's most severe economic crises in modern times, which is having such a damaging effect on the country and its 5 million people. Now, this crisis began in around 2019, and it is rooted in decades of corruption, and mismanagement by the Lebanese authorities. The country has accumulated huge debt and over the years has become heavily dependent on imports for almost everything. There's widespread unemployment and people have been taking to the streets to demonstrate against the government. And you'll remember in August of 2020 there was that huge explosion at the fertilizer storage facility at the port in Beirut. That explosion was so great it tore through the city and killed at least 190 people, injured over 6,000 people, and caused over $10 billion in damage. Today, the Lebanese pound has lost more than 90% of its value against the US dollar since 2019. And of course, inflation has skyrocketed, wiping out people's wages, causing food prices to triple, and so on. The government has also introduced tighter restrictions on bank accounts, making sure that people are unable to withdraw their savings or transfer money abroad as much as they normally would be able to.
Really a tragic situation over there. I'm curious, before I let you go, Colm, what exactly did Pope Francis and the Lebanese church leaders, what were they praying for?
Well, more than anything, they were praying for hope, Tracy, hope in the country of Lebanon, because without hope, of course, you have nothing. And according to Cardinal Leonardo Sandri, prefect of the Vatican Congregation for Oriental Churches, he is the man who organized this initiative. He said that the purpose of the day was that they would all walk together. He said the church leaders have brought to Rome, again, the cry of their people. The theme of the day was, the Lord God has plans for peace, together for Lebanon. Tracy?
Okay, Colm, thank you so much. Colm Flynn, EWTN Newsroom Correspondent. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tracy.
And joining us now with more analysis is Sarah Bassil, Director of Communications for In Defense of Christians. Sarah, welcome back. So good to be with you again. We just heard about the issues facing Lebanon. Can you talk to us about what daily life is like for the people living there right now?
Well, I want to first say thank you for having me on the show, Tracy. As Colin mentioned, the past several months, the Lebanese lira has really hit several record lows in its values. It's been disastrous for the economy, mostly noticeably by the fuel, food, and medicine shortages. I'm sure your viewers remember the fuel shortage on the East Coast a few months ago and how Colonial Pipeline was essentially held hostage for a couple of days. Well, in Lebanon, that very same crisis has been happening for more than a year, and the Lebanese government is the one holding people hostage. To give you a little bit of a comparison on what's happening, I want you to consider the average price of bread in Lebanon, in the United States, which is about $2.50. Now, imagine if that price went up to $11 in a single year, and you don't even have gas to drive to the supermarket. The level of inflation that the country is facing is on every product on the market, from essentials to car parts. I was in Beirut a couple weeks ago, and I have no idea how people are making ends meet, and it's a disastrous situation.
It's so hard to imagine over here. Thank you for putting that really in perspective for us. I also know that your group, In Defense of Christians, you all held your own prayer for Lebanon today. Tell us more about that and the importance of it, and also who took part.
Right. So the importance of the prayer is it's an ecumenical prayer of several different leaders, including Bishop Zaidan of the Maronite Catholic Eparchy of Our Lady of Los Angeles, Archbishop Talanian, who is the prelate of the Eastern Prelacy of the Armenian Apostolic Church, and a representative of Bishop John Tulloch, who is the leader of the Syriac Orthodox Archdiocese of the Eastern United States. All of these church leaders have been very important in the efforts that we have in the church to pray, of course, but also to work with IDC on our initiatives on Lebanon. And so coming together and praying for our beloved Lebanon is very important, and it was a good effort to us to get together and promote that message of unity across the diaspora, essentially.
Yeah, and Sarah, can you talk about the other ways IDC is helping the people in Lebanon? And for those who are watching right now and would like to help, what can they do?
Sure. So first and foremost, the most important aspect of IDC's advocacy is supporting the Lebanese Armed Forces, or the LAF. arguably, the LAF is one of the only functioning institutions in Lebanon, and it's the main peacekeeping force in the country. So if aid to the LAF is cut off, you basically hand over Lebanon to the Iran-sponsored organization of Hezbollah, and that's a terrorist organization that has plagued the country for decades now. And unfortunately, that's exactly what Representative Lee Zeldin of New York and Representative Elaine Luria of Virginia are trying to do by the introduction of two bills introduced to the House of Representatives recently. So supporting the LAF is really essential and crucial to the mission of IDC. On a more positive note, we continue to work with both chambers of Congress and the administration on direct aid to NGOs in Lebanon, and not through the government, of course, in efforts to alleviate the burden of the economic crisis. I encourage your viewers to head over to idcindefenseofchristians.org and take a look at our action items, which you can ask your members of Congress to support legislation that supports the LAF, the Lebanese Armed Forces, a number of NGOs, and our efforts altogether to promote stability in the region.
So we have about a minute left, not a whole lot of time, but I'm wondering, are there any signs the situation will improve over there, either politically or economically?
Well, if you look at the concept of Pope Francis bringing the leaders together, you can't understate the power of prayer to begin with, and so that was important. But the ecumenical effort to advocate for Lebanon is a very much needed start, and you can only go from there. So the situation can get very bad very quickly, but we hope that the efforts that the international community is playing right now does change that situation. You have Secretary of State Blinken talking about this. You have several leaders in the UN pressuring France. A bunch of groups internationally pressuring the Lebanese government. And so Pope Francis's initiative on this is very much needed, and it's a good first step. Hope is a very powerful thing, but we want to see action behind these prayers.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. Thank you for what you do. Sarah Bassil, Director of Communications for In Defense of Christians. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much.
Up next, heat wave. How Catholic Charities is trying to help people stay cool. And Princess Diana. How Prince William and Prince Harry are remembering their mother. Catholic agencies in the Pacific Northwest are providing relief during an unprecedented heat wave. In Spokane, Catholic Charities of Eastern Washington has opened 5 new cooling shelters for those in need. Record-breaking heat is being blamed for hundreds of deaths in the region. Temperatures are forecasted above 100 degrees through tomorrow. Equity-oriented philanthropy is a priority for Mackenzie Scott, the former wife of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. From her fortune, a recent multi-million-dollar gift went to Faith in Public Life, a progressive group opposed to core Catholic positions on sexuality, family, and life. And Indiana pro-life law is under temporary injunction before it could take effect today. It required doctors to inform women about a treatment that could halt and reverse a drug-induced abortion. Several states have such laws, but 3 others are blocked by ongoing litigation. Well, tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, the House Pro-Life Caucus is calling on House Democrats to consider a bill that would make the Hyde Amendment permanent.
And I say with great sadness and sorrow, the Democratic Party has become the party of death, and that includes the abortion president, Joe Biden.
Representative Chris Smith tells host Catherine Hadro about his pro-life bill forbidding taxpayer dollars from funding abortion. That is tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly at 10 p.m. Eastern. Check EWTN.com for other listings. And finally tonight, during a brief ceremony at London's Kensington Palace today, Prince William and Prince Harry unveiled a statue of their late mother, Princess Diana. Well, the occasion marked what would have been Princess Diana's 60th birthday. Afterward, the brothers issued a joint statement praising their mother's qualities that made her a force for good around the world. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.